So hello and welcome back to the channel, guys. Now today, we're going to be talking about MMA, and we're going to be talking about MMA fighters, MMA figures that need a movie made about their life pronto. We need a biopic that's going to follow these people through fortune, through fame, through failure, because it would make an epic story. It would make an incredible movie, an Oscar-worthy movie. So let's get started. In MMA, there is no shortage of rags to riches stories, right? Made it out of the hood, made it out of the favelas, made it out of the mountains, made it out of a war-torn country. But they don't make come-up stories quite like Francis Ngannou's. Every stage of this man's life is an incredible story to tell, right? From working in mines, right? Telling everyone that he wants to be a boxing champion, everyone calling him crazy, right? Calling him delusional, to him trying to immigrate and smuggle into France and failing a few times, to becoming this well-known knockout artist, becoming really popular and famous, right? Maybe letting that go to his head a little bit, and then he gets a chance to achieve his dream, become a combat sports world champion, and he comes up short, but not just short by a little, not just short by a few cents. He comes up short by dollars, by bills, all right? And this breaks him down a little bit. He has to take time to build himself back up, build back his confidence. And then finally, years later, he achieves his dream, right? He bests the man that bested him and taught him many wise lessons. But then he realizes that the grass wasn't always greener on the other side, right? There's still a lot of unfairness in this world he stepped into. There's a lot of people in his similar position that are not being treated fairly, not being paid fairly. And even after achieving everything, he could easily say, man, I don't care about all these underlings. All these other athletes, they don't have my God-given gifts, right? I don't need to care about them. No, he's still fighting for other people's money, other people's rights, other people's workers' rights. And then they label him hard to work with, greedy for it. They villainize him for it. And not only that, but also the loss of his son and him coming back after that, after losing, the most precious thing that he sacrificed everything for. I mean, everything about this guy's life is tragic. It's inspiring, So let's take one stage. Him trying to immigrate to France, right? Because he had to sail there, right? He couldn't smuggle on land. He couldn't fly there, right? So let's just take that. I'm not sure of the details of how these failed. I'm assuming that they were caught by the Coast Guard and sent back, right? But let's pretend that didn't happen, all right? Let's dramatize it for a bit. Let's say that he wants to is trying to get a boat to take him there to France, and everyone is telling him, no, we can't go right now, right? A big storm is coming, all right? If we try, we will probably die and drown, all right? We can't do this. And he says, I'm willing to die to be a champion. If I die in the ring, if I die on the ground, if I die in the sea, it is all the same to me. I'm willing to die to be a champion. So some guy says, all right, fuck it. I'll charge you double. Let's see what happens. They go, they sail, a huge storm blows by, right? Crazy rain, crazy waves. Their boat capsizes, right? And he almost drowns. And then in his near-death experiences, he sees like his whole life flash before his eyes. He sees everything. He sees, the highs. He sees the lows. He's becoming a champion. He sees his son being born. He sees his son dying. And just God just won't let him die. You see this amazing cinematic image of a hand coming down and pulling him from the water. And then he wakes up and he asks, like, am I in France? And they're just like, no. And then he just tries again. Like, I think that'd be very tragic, but also be very funny. So there's so many amazing stories you could tell about this guy's life. So I think Francis Ngannou, biopic about Francis Ngannou, would be an incredible watch. We need this. We need this. His story is not being done written at all, but we need this. So next up, we got Ali Abdelaziz, Ali Abdelaziz. I did not say that these guys would all be the heroes of their own stories, right? But this would make an incredible narrative, something like something similar to Lord of War or American Made, War Dogs, Wolf of Wall Street, right? Where you're following the antagonists of the story, and you're following them through maybe sympathetic beginnings, all right? Maybe sympathetic decisions, but not necessarily the best actions, right? It's kind of like sometimes the biggest asshole you know has a great story to tell, right? And I'm not going to be on their side for the entire story, but I want to know how it ends. That's how I feel about Ali Abdelaziz. Now, there's better videos explaining all this. I'm not going to, I'm not trying to write a documentary here. I want to make a movie, right? But for the uninitiated, this guy was brought up on terrorist and I believe trafficking charges, weapons trafficking, if I remember correctly. And he was flipped as an informant for the feds, for the Muslim Brotherhood, but was feeding the feds misinformation and working as a double agent. This guy goes from this to becoming one of the biggest MMA managers in the UFC. If you think about it, he owns maybe a third to half of the UFC. I think this guy's life is an incredible and poetic expression of violence, right? God only knows how much violence this man has seen in his life. So he goes from profiting off of violence, right, to being arrested for that. And then he gets the opportunity to get a lifeline, right? And then he says, screw that lifeline, throws it away, and presumably puts himself in the position to experience and see even more violence, while then putting himself at risk for more violence, for retaliation from the feds, to maybe someone in the Muslim Brotherhood thinking he's a rat and icing him for that. And then he goes from that to being someone who profits and controls violence, controls when violence happens, where violence happens, who gets paid how much money for this and that violence. That is an honest and true and cruel expression of violence. I think this would make an incredible story. Not the most sympathetic narrative, but an amazing story where you know the other shoe is going to drop. You know the feds are going to come busting in. You know the warrants are going to get signed. You know how this story is going to end. It's not going to end well for our main character, but you need to see how it ends. I need to see how the story ends. This guy should not be in the USA, by the way. Like, legally speaking. Like, he's kind of ponying up to the powers that be right now to keep himself in the US. But this guy legally should not be in the US. Just saying. But let's move on. Great movie, though. Would be a great movie. All right, so next up, we got our boy Arman Sarukian. I just think a reboot of Boss Baby is in dire need, and I would just love to see him ordering around his chefs and maids and butlers and servants for an hour and a half. That sounds like really entertaining. I'm just fucking around, obviously. So next up, we have Lightning Lee Murray. And there's already a documentary about this guy, but I feel like a biopic would suit him so much more. So I'm not going to go over too many details, but for those who don't know, Lightning Lee Murray was a guy that fought in the UFC, and he was arrested, and he had successfully, with a crew, robbed a few banks, but he was arrested in one of the biggest heists in modern history. I think even if you take, even if you adjust for inflation, he was busted for trying to steal the most amount of money in history. Do fact check that for me. But this would be an incredible story to tell. I mean, if you mix an MMA movie with like an Ocean's 11, I mean, you really can't go wrong. You really can't go wrong. And I'm sure there was a lot of other crimes involved behind the scenes. You know, typically bank robbers don't just commit one crime, which is bank robbing. They typically do a lot of other stuff. But this would be an amazing, amazing story. I mean, do I need to say more? You're selling out theaters easily. So next up, we have Jared Gordon. Now, this is not a popularity contest, all right? I want to pick fighters that have an incredible story to tell, and I think he has an incredible one to tell. Now, this is going to get a little bit deep and a little bit, uncomfortable. Trigger warning. So Jared Gordon has been very open and vocal about when he was a boy, he was sexually abused by a man. And this obviously had a very negative impact on him, very much traumatized him. And then in his early adulthood, he struggled with substance abuse for a while. Now he got clean, of course, trained and, started fighting MMA and had a lot of success there. And it does not matter what heights he achieves in his career. I think just considering where he started from and where he is now, there's so much to say about that. I think this would very much ring the same as something like A Beautiful Boy with Timothy Chalamet. I might go on a little bit of a rant here, but I think just him being so open about this in a sport like MMA, where every single fiber of your being is there for an audience to judge, right? If you come in, if a hair on your chest is out of place, someone is gonna write a 4-page article about it, right? Everything you're literally naked for all of us to see. And I think being so open about what has happened to him, what he's done to himself throughout his life is it's a level of bravery that I think dwarfs just the idea of someone being tough and resilient in the octagon, being tough and resilient in life, period. And that's all I can say. I think a biopic about Jared Gordon's life would be a tough watch. It would be a sad watch. It'd be an inspirational watch, but it would be an important one. And I think this would also be incredibly inspiring and a good movie for people who are struggling with addiction themselves, people that have overcome addiction, people that are recovering. I think Jared Gordon is the man, and I would love to see a movie made about his life. So next up, we have Pat Barry, and we have the Shevchenko sisters and their coach. Now, this doesn't need to be a biopic as much as it needs to be like a 4-part, quiet on set, Diddy-style documentary, because this is just not right. There seems to be an epidemic of WMMA fighters dating coaches or having at least intimate relationships with people in their corner, which just seems like kind of eating and shitting in the same place, right? That does not seem right to mix such intimate relationships in your professional life, right? But even if it's not weird, even if you both fostered a relationship as two adults, right? There's too many instances of this to just kind of let that shit slide. All right, so I'm gonna talk about two things outside of MMA or competing in MMA, more so in a general combat sports arena. So when you have a coach that has known fighters, known competitors since they were so young, you have someone that, from one has, garnered their trust and known them since they were, an adolescent. But then you also have someone that that they trust implicitly to give them advice and direction and guidance in the most high stakes of scenarios, right? You have someone for years and years and years telling them, what to eat, what to drink, what to do, what to think, how to feel. And that's just something that I think can be very easily taken advantage of. And we see it too often to just kind of let that shit slide, in my opinion. And then you also have different scenarios where I feel like a lot of people are drawn to combat sports because of, a lot of different reasons, but you could definitely point to people wanting to build back up confidence, right? Wanting to improve themselves physically, mentally, all that stuff. So when you have someone that can help you do that, but you have a bad actor in that situation that kind of wants to build you up in one way and tear you down in another way, or wants to take advantage of you in another way, anyone on the outside seeing that happen is going to be a little bit sick to their stomach, I think. So I'm kind of glad that people are talking about this a little bit more, but I feel like this could be a very wide discussion in all areas of combat sports, not just competing at the highest levels. I think just at the highest levels of competing is just when it's the most visible. So if you stuck around for the entire video, I just want to thank you personally, parasocially, and I am going to be making this more of an MMA channel, and of course talking about MMA in the context of like video games, movies, pop culture, right, in a joking manner. So if this kind of content resonates with you, I'd really appreciate it if you would drop a like, subscribe, and I'll be making a lot more of this very, very soon. Have a good one.